and the top question goes to Dave Olson, that miscreant. It says, going through my well-worn copy of The Demon-Haunted World, I noticed that the theory of man-made global warming, one of Carl Sagan's favorites, failed one of the steps in the baloney detector kit, argument from authority. Then I went back to the top and realized that the theory failed all the steps. Does this sound like something that could make a good firewall? It absolutely does. It's a great idea. The book he's speaking about is a book that was extremely influential for me. I really, on a lot of levels, that book taught me how to think about things, just how to think in a lot of ways. The Demon-Haunted World is a Carl Sagan book that deals with reason versus superstition, and it was I thought the whole book was a monument to reason, and I was so taken with it. I was so impressed with it. And Carl Sagan in there lays out something for what he called a baloney detection kit, which is a nice word, baloney. But basically, how can you tell if something's true or not? That's what I talked about today on my Nexus report that I'll make possible tomorrow. How can you tell if something's true or not? How do you know? Dave Olson points out that there is a bunch of steps that Carl Sagan outlined in order to see if something's true or not. And according to Dave, the theory of man-made global warming fails all of these steps, but Sagan was in favor of it. And how do you square that? Apparently, Sagan knew that that this whole idea of nuclear winter, that if there's a nuclear exchange that's going to put enough dust in the air from the fires that it will essentially extinguish all life on Earth, Sagan knew that wasn't true. But he was so concerned about nuclear weapons that he decided to support this movement and get behind it, put his name behind it, and his credibility behind it. That's the end of his credibility as far as I'm concerned. Anytime you have somebody like that who makes a statement that he knows to be untrue, and not only makes the statement, but basically makes political position on something he knows to not be true, has lost all of their credibility with me. And it's a shame because I admire him very much. I admire the way he thinks very much, but there's that blind spot that so many people on the left seem to have. And the blind spot is it's okay to lie about things as long as it's for a good cause, as long as you're advancing a cause of goodness, then it's okay to lie. Sagan thought it was okay to lie because he thought that there's a good chance the Earth that humans were going to go extinct or suffer horrendous casualties in a nuclear war. I don't think he was right. I didn't think he was right at the time, but that's not the point. Even if he was right, even if there was consistent, firm evidence that stopping nuclear weapons was critical, to lie about it is just the end of your credibility. I occasionally say things that turn out not to be true, but I've never ever lied in my life not on this show, certainly, not in the work I do. I've never ever once have I gone out there with something that I knew to be untrue. Not once. And so I was very disturbed by that. Sagan, however, in that baloney detection kit, had a sentence that I thought was just so profoundly good, so profoundly, astonishingly good. I'll never forget it. And it actually almost maybe comes back in a weird sort of way to what we were talking about a minute ago. So in this book, on this section on the baloney detection kit, hang on a second. Sagan sets up a thought experiment. And in the thought experiment, he has a friend come to him and say that there's a dragon in his garage. And Sagan basically writes the thing out in a kind of a role play kind of way, and it makes, it's pretty reasonable. His friend comes up to Carl Sagan and says, I have a dragon in my garage. Sagan says, needless to say, I'm extremely interested and excited, and say, so let's go look at the dragon. So they go over to the garage, and they look inside the garage, and there's nothing in there. And Sagan says, well, there's no dragon in here. And the friend says, it's an invisible dragon. And then Sagan says, okay, if it's an invisible dragon, why don't we just lay some talcum powder out on the floor, and when it moves around, we'll see its footsteps, and we'll be able to tell where it is. And the friend said, well, it doesn't leave footsteps. It's incorporeal. And then Sagan said, all right, well, why don't we get some kind of thermal imaging in here, and we should be able to see the flames of the dragon's hot breath. And then the friend says, but his flaming breath is not hot. It's not a hot flame at all. This is all special pleading. And then here's the line that just knocked me down. Sagan said, "So what's the difference between an invisible, inaudible, incorporeal dragon who breathes non-existent cold fire and no dragon at all? What's the difference between these two things?" I thought that's exactly right, isn't it? If you plead yourself all the way into the weeds like that, what's the difference between this guy's... let's say the guy was right. Let's just say, for the sake of the argument, he was right. Let's say in the garage, there was a dragon that was invisible, made no noise, didn't touch the ground, and blew fire that was perfectly room temperature. What's the difference between that and no dragon at all? No, there's no difference. It's a profound insight, I thought. I really thought so. And I was just brutally disappointed about this. Sagan also had a lot of things that he said politically fail his baloney detection test. And I actually wish I could spend a couple of hours with Carl Sagan and sit down and ask him questions about this. Why does it fail? Because I think he may or may not have been self-aware enough to realize his blind spot if it was pointed out to him. You'd have to get him by the collar and really just kind of rub his face in it like a bad puppy and say, "Listen, you wrote this here and it seemed to me like you believe it. Now you said this isn't true. This fails this test, this fails that test, so why do you do it?" And where I come back to this is, if somebody that bright can be blinded by these kind of things, then anyone can be blinded by these kind of things. And I find it to be a remarkably common thing in science for scientists to be convinced that they must make political statements because they have to exaggerate some of the data they're seeing because the data is alarming. Then maybe they think it's so alarming that they have to really do something about it. And so instead of telling us the truth, they just exaggerate things, thinking, well, it's all for the right reason. It's not. It's a lie. And I never really forgave him for that, honestly. And it taught me a very good lesson, and that lesson is that nobody is immune to bias. Nobody. And every now and then I'll catch myself. It's usually not political, but something else. I'll make an assumption about something, and I'm 100% sure of it. It's a minor little thing, and next thing you know, I was like, "Oh, you're wrong about that." Oh, so there you go.